Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Who was here last week? Show of hands. One person, two. Okay, three. Excellent. So last week I asked the people who were here to go over a group of videos, and we would discuss some of the stuff in those videos. That's it's an approach to giving dawah that is an intuitive and just a logical step-by-step approach to the conclusion of Islam. First of all, you have to discuss God's existence, then you discuss God's oneness, then you discuss the revelation, and then you discuss prophethood. Because if you start talking to somebody about prophethood right away, then it can be difficult if they don't believe in God at all. And you're giving them, information and connecting to different prophets and so on, and what is the message of prophets, but then they don't believe in God in the first place. There's an atheist argument that is used to, that is, it makes sense if you don't think about it, which is that and it's true in itself, that you can't prove something from within itself, like in the sense that I can't say the Bible is true because the Bible says it's true. And I can't say the Quran is true because the Quran says it's true. Right? When you start the Quran says there is no doubt in it. This is the book. There is no doubt in it. It is a guidance for the God conscious. But then a person can say, okay, I read it and then I have doubt. And that's a different that's a different topic, but subhanallah, the Quran is also a great source of hidayah for many people, but at the same time, proving something because it's saying it's true, that's not proof that it's true. If a Christian is trying to prove that Jesus is God, and they're saying that or they're trying to prove that the Bible is true, and they're saying, oh, because the Bible says this and this and this and this, therefore the Bible is true from within itself. You can prove that the Quran is true because of miracles that are found in the Quran, but when Allah says that this is the book, there is no doubt in it, that is actually a claim that sets up the Quran for being proven false. That's a challenge on the book itself. Because if the book is proven to be doubtful and full of mistakes and so on, then you know that it's not true. Then you know that statement is false. But you can't prove something from by it saying that it's true to begin with. Does that make sense? But that's not what Islam does. Islam, we don't just say we believe in the Quran because the Quran says it's true. The Quran says it has no doubt. Therefore, we believe that the Quran is true. But there is a logical way to get somebody to that conclusion of La ilaha illallah, even without referring them to the miracles that are found in the Quran. The miracles that are found in the Quran today, that's a great proof to try to convince somebody of the truth of Islam or the truth of the Quran. But even before Islam, even before the miracles were known, Islam has been proven throughout the years using logic and using reasoning. Did you watch the Gorap videos, any of them? Yes? No. Oh man, everybody's disappointing me. All right, well, I was hoping to discuss those today. Rather than discuss it, I'm going to give you guys another week. How about that? So now, forget everything I said before. This is when we discuss da'wah, there's a few different parts. One is who we are and who we need to become in order to be the best da'i possible. Did we discuss that enough last time? Okay, alhamdulillah. The second thing is why Islam is true to the case that you're giving to somebody. Like if somebody says, okay, here's 15 minutes, tell me why you believe in Islam, why Islam is true, why all those other religions in the world are false, and why you say that Islam is true. There's another atheist argument relating to this, that they say, Pascal's wager. basically, in essence, they say that, a lot of theists have made this argument for many years. That they say that, look, if you're atheist, okay, you could be right, you could be wrong. If you're religious, you could be right, you could be wrong. But if you're an atheist and you're wrong, you're going to hell. And if you're a believer and you're right, you're going to heaven. That was an argument that was made, in fact, by Ali radiallahu anhu. Right? And that's valid. But then an easy response to that is, hey, well, there's so many religions out there. And they're saying that if I'm not following the right one, then I'm going to go to hellfire. And none of them make sense anyways. So I'm not just going to follow one and change my whole life out of fear. Then I'm going to go to hellfire, because if I choose this one, according to like the other thousands of religions, I'm still going to, be punished. So then, then how do you prove that Islam is true actually in itself? How do you what case do you make to somebody? That's the Gorap. In fact, subhanAllah, before I studied the Gorap, they asked about it in the test for the Dawah program that I was joining, because a lot of the members, they studied the Gorap method first, and I told them, no, I didn't study it. But then they said, how would you describe Islam, or how would you prove Islam to somebody? And subhanAllah, the argument that I gave, here, let me try to pull it up. I have the document that they said, introducing Islam, I said, for example, someone agnostic, I would acknowledge their belief, no, if he really exists, did he reach out to us? Well, he claims to have sent us all these prophets. So again, does he exist? That's God and his oneness. And then a revelation, will he claim, did he reach out to us? A revelation, well, he claims to have sent us all these prophets and prophets. So that's basically the Gorab method. That I was using it logically even before I saw that it was a method that was taught on how to give da'wah. Because that is the most logical way to talk to somebody about Islam, to prove to them God's existence, to discuss it rationally. And it's important as a Muslim to be able to discuss these things rationally rather than telling people to believe in something when you yourself can't prove it even for yourself. So number one, again, is how do you become the best da'i? What kind of person do you have to be a da'i? And you can also talk about the rulings of da'wah and so on. I'm saying about the things we can discuss in this class, and that was already discussed. Number two, why we even believe in Islam in the first place, the proof of Islam, and so on, the proof of God's existence. That discussion needs to be had. And third is answering misconceptions. Why? Okay, if Islam is true, then why can you make sense out of this and this and this and this issue? So the misconceptions is generally one of the hardest things that people deal with. And one of the sisters asked a question in regard to one of those misconceptions. And actually, in order to join that da'wah program, you have to be able to answer the misconceptions, and I mentioned many of them last time. So inshallah today we'll go over that. And the questions that they asked, first of all, are questions that I'd like to ask you guys and just see what your answers are. Okay? Are you guys ready? This was supposed to be next class. So these can be very confusing for a lot of Muslims. Okay? Are you guys ready? I guess you're not ready. Inshallah, I'll see you guys next week after you go over the Quran. Assalamu alaikum. Are you guys ready? Yeah. Yes? Not sure? No? Not sure. Okay. Who wants to take the first question? Question number one. Why did the Prophet marry a 9-year-old child? Yes. The culture back then is an important factor, yes? Okay.
People matured earlier back then.
Yes.
Where they didn't have to do sexuality necessarily more for protection for her and knowledge and scholarship.
Yes. Very good. So you see, the issue with recording is if you're in an interactive class, the recording is not going to come out as well. So I'll answer the question as well. That's a very good. That covers a lot of parts of the answer. So we actually had to answer those questions. Would you like to see the way that I answered it? To be able to think critically and rationally is an important skill. Now, with a lot of the controversial questions, before I answer this question, with a lot of controversial questions, a lot of Muslims find it much easier to deny than to think critically and answer the question. There is one so-called, scholar who says that as a matter of principle, because it is wrong to do that, therefore he's going to deny the hadith that say that the Prophet ﷺ did that, and he's going to go with basically fabricated or very incorrect opinion that Aisha radiallahu anha was 17 when the Prophet ﷺ married her, simply because he must reject those hadiths because they do not align with his view of what is moral or not. So to deny, that's an easy way to answer a question, to say, oh, that's not a part of Islam. If somebody asks you, about the hijab, and you're not wearing a hijab, they're like, hey, why is hijab a part of Islam? Oh, it's everybody's choice. Yes, it is, and people can choose, but the command is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, it's everybody's choice, and it's not really an important thing in Islam and whatever, and it's really about what's in your heart, and it's not. To deflect the question in that way is much easier. But then, hey, look, this is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you deny a matter of ijma' or something that is mentioned in the Quran, according to what the Quran says, by the way, the Quran says, يُدْنِينَ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ جَلَابِيبِهِنَّ. Jilbab, here in the traditional Arabic sense, covers everything in the body, including the face and hands. So then the scholars, they said, no, well, according to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, excluded the face and the hands from the Quranic order to cover the entire body. But again, it's easier to deny something than to answer it rationally. So when somebody asks you a question like that, acknowledge the reason behind them asking that. And then, again, build familiarity. Accept the valid parts of what they're saying. So I would tell that person, great question. To start off, please understand that any marriage or intercourse that is harmful physically or psychologically to a girl is forbidden in Islam. So if it's going to harm the person psychologically, if it's going to harm them physically, then it's forbidden in Islam. So there's no, harmful and damaging, forced, whatever, a'udhu billah. Secondly, I'm also born in America and understand how we react to hearing something like that. We hear about something like that nowadays, it sets off a few alarm bells. If we don't take a moment to think, our emotional reaction is to judge it according to our time and circumstances of this time. That's called ethnocentrism, right? Where you're judging a different society or different time and circumstances in according with their own time. So it's like people in Finland saying that, look at those crazy Californians, they're so inappropriate, they're going outside, wearing jackets and, not wearing jackets and they're wearing short sleeves. It doesn't make any sense to do that, right? And they're from a very cold climate and they judge us here in the sun, going out without a jacket on or without a coat. Does that make any sense? Because over there it's cold, over here it's hot. You can't expect people to do the same thing under different circumstances. It doesn't make any sense. So then the important thing is to look at what things are impacting that society and why that society is in its particular way. Again, keeping in mind that if it is actually harmful to the child, if it is actually harmful to a person, then it is haram. So, in a society without electricity and technology where tasks were simpler, children became adults when they were physically grown. There was no elementary, middle school, and high school or college for the adulthood process. Right? These things did not exist. It's when you became old enough to start working or taking care of a home, you have to start doing that in order to survive. People don't have the luxury to take care of their kid for 18 years. Where would the number 18 have come from for them anyways? It's nonsensical. 18 for us comes from the fact that people finish high school when they're 18 years old and generally start their adult life around that time. So in that society, a young man would begin working, and it's not just that society; it's most of the world up until the pre-industrial world, you could say. A young man would begin working when he can, and a young woman would get married and begin caring for household. Right? Unless you had slaves, then there's a lot of household work that needs to be done. There's no water faucets, there's no whatever. The work that men did generally was much more suitable for men physically than it was for women. Nowadays, alhamdulillah, that's not the case. There's a lot of, people are able to survive, and there's, but back then it was very different. So it became the necessary norm in that society. You understand what I mean by necessary? That if that was the case where they said for some, tell them, if that person was here from back then, and you tried to prove to them why you should wait until somebody's 18 to get married, they would look at you like you're crazy. They're like, tell me one reason why you should wait until they're 18. Oh, it's harmful. How is it harmful? If somebody's physically, biologically, emotionally ready, and they're in their society an adult, then it makes no sense to argue to somebody from a different circumstance that they should wait longer. Nowadays, somebody at that age is still considered a child and still doesn't have the tools or training to join the adult world. However, that wasn't always the case. Right? Even in America, the legal ages of marriage still reflect that in some states. I know a guy, I think he was 17 years old. He got married in New York to a 14-year-old girl. It was legal over there. Whatever, you have to do something through the court or whatever, but it's legal. With court approval in New York, 14 is the minimum. And he got married, and alhamdulillah, he has a very happy marriage, now years later. So clearly we can see that the legal ages were lower in the past because everyone was a pedophile. Right? No, that's definitely not true. The norms just reflected what was practical. Now, in regard to the Prophet ﷺ himself, there are 2 points worth mentioning. One is that Aisha radiallahu anha was given to the noble Prophet ﷺ 2 years prior to him taking her as his wife with him and consummating the marriage. So now, if somebody uses the norms of that time, they say, okay, the Prophet ﷺ should have known better than the norms of that time, and he should have waited. Well, first of all, he wouldn't. What did he do? She got married to him when she was 7 years old. He waited for 2 years for her to grow before, and this was a lesson, teaching the Muslims here to wait until the person is physically, emotionally capable of marriage. Now, if what people, when they bring this up, what they're trying to say low-key, or what they actually say is, astaghfirullah, a'udhu billah, they try to say the Prophet ﷺ was sexually deviant or a pedophile, a'udhu billah. So if somebody is a pedophile, let's say you put a pedophile in that position the Prophet ﷺ was in, you can marry, and society is okay with it, as many young girls as you want. There was no limit. The Prophet ﷺ was the one who taught them the limit of 4. You could marry as many as you want. Everybody in your society is willing to marry you their youngest daughters. You're the one who's literally making the rules. And yet you're marrying women who are, all previously married before, and many of them, you're marrying them to take care of them and so on. You're not, and the only person that you marry who was young is your best friend's daughter. This was a very close relationship. Again, during that time, it was considered strange for somebody to marry, the daughter friend, because they saw it as like that person is his brother. And there's even one that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu brought this objection up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, corrected him. Alhamdulillah, in Islam we see that just because somebody's friend doesn't prohibit any marriage. Anyways, so then if a pedophile was in that position, they would marry multiple young girls, a'udhu billah, and they would pay no regard to whether it's harmful for them emotionally, psychologically. They would not wait 2 years after being married to a girl. So it doesn't make any sense even as an accusation. More importantly, additionally, the Prophet ﷺ, he could have been given all the young girls he wanted. Any girl and any parent would have been and still would be honored to give their child to the most noble of all of creation. And so on. And I mentioned the other things in the answer that I just talked about. Also, another logical reason behind the marriage is look at who Aisha radiallahu anha is. Let's look at her. Now let's talk about morality. Something can be wrong or right, in different situations and different circumstances. In Islam, things that are immoral in every single society are forbidden. Like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the rules of Islam to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is meant to be the last religion. So the rules then have to be loose enough in some things to be adaptable to every society. Okay? And they have to be strict enough in some things that they have to fit every society. So things like murder, things like adultery have a very strict punishment. Things like marriage, which really differs from society to society, is very open so as not to restrict any society. For example, in our society today, people have the norm of marrying one. But if Islam set marrying one as the rule, just because of how people would feel about that today, then that would have hindered the capability of women to survive in many societies in the past. So when the rule is given in Islam, Allah has taken every single factor into consideration. Does that make sense? Additionally, one more thing, when the Prophet ﷺ married Aisha radiallahu anha, look at her in terms of like a moral judgment. If you're saying that it was damaging to her or hurtful, or she was hurt physically, psychologically, whatever, she was an example and a model example of how a woman is, and she was a leader of the companions after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. She was a teacher. And she, like they say that 40% of the deen was transmitted through Aisha radiallahu anha. Because of her young age when she married the Prophet ﷺ, she outlived him for the longest time. And she remained as a teacher and passed down Islam. Now, why is it necessary for one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ to outlive him by a long time? Because the wife of the Prophet ﷺ is the one who sees how he is at home and can answer a lot of rulings in regard to things that other people are not able to witness the Prophet ﷺ doing. And issues relating to women, issues relating to the home, etc. So there's a huge wisdom in it. She played a very important role in Islam. And she clearly, was such a leader and such a teacher and such an exemplar of a person that where is the psychological, physical harm? What judgment do you have to, objectively say that was a wrong thing that the Prophet ﷺ did? A'udhu billah, none. Inna Allah la ya'muru bil fahsha. Indeed, Allah does not order sinfulness or shamefulness or vile things, and the marriage to her was an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any remaining questions? Does anybody have a rational objection to that maybe I might be able to answer? Something that's in your mind, you're like, oh, but ... Yes?
What about the argument that psychologically studies show that people aren't fully developed, girls until they're 18 and then males until they're 25? So you can use the biological argument,
Psychologically fully developed, right? People need to understand what psychologically fully developed means, right? Now, does some guy who is, gets married at 20 years old, Or the guy who I mentioned, 17 years old, got married to his wife in America, 14 years old. Did it stop his psychological development? Does it stop her psychological development? It may even aid it. It's not a reason why not to get married. Those are two separate issues. You see what I'm saying? Any other objection, question, but ... Jazakallah khair for bringing that one up. Okay. Second of all, and for the people, yes. I can barely hear you. I'm sorry.
I heard a question asked that the Prophet ﷺ had approached Dawah when she was playing with the little doll horses, and she was still a young child, and I think this was right before the marriage was set. And people have said that her playing with these toys shows that she was still in the stage of being a child.
Yes, I know guys who are like 20-something, 30-something that play, World of Warcraft. There are that's the answer to that is still the same, in regard to the society, etc., 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 all of those things. Any other question? World of Warcraft is made for people who are 20, 30, whatever. But, Okay. You guys ready for question 2? Why is polygamy allowed in Islam? I'm going to try to keep myself as much to this as possible. Yeah.
At the time of the Prophet, from what I understand, it was a war-torn era, so a lot of wives were left widowed. And since the ratio of men to women was so drastically different, and a lot of the widows had children that they needed to support and to stay home, they needed that financial support. So oftentimes men would marry more than one wife, more as a way of supporting them and their family, rather than like a way of trying to get rid of them.
Yeah, and it's not even that they had children and needed to stay home. It's just that it's the tasks that were needed to even survive on your own were very difficult, and the jobs that would earn you your money for women at the same time were much more challenging. It was much more challenging for a woman to earn her income. Some women, inshallah, let's see the answer over here, but that's a very good answer. All right. Again, this will repeat some of the core things that we talked about previously. It is important to understand that every prophet comes with the message of Tawheed, but the rules and miracles chosen for them differ based on the time and the followers. This is based on what is known at the time and the situation of the people. Maybe you'd give some insight on how Allah, knowing what challenges would happen, gave Musa alayhi salam miracles that went beyond, magic, which was what people were being controlled or deceived by. Or Isa alayhi salam, anyways, were given miracles relative to his time. Those were miracles that had to have been seen and directly believed to be miraculous. The thing about the followers of the Prophet ﷺ is that his nation is, right, as I said, who's the nation of the Prophet ﷺ? Were they people of just one time? No, it's every person until the Day of Judgment. So he had many miracles in this life that were seen and were miraculous for his people, but like the miracles of Isa and alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam, you had to have been there for them to be miraculous. But the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, there's even miracles in the Quran, in the scientific miracles today, Allah answering, atheist arguments of today, answering them 1400 years ago, etc. So the Quran is clearly designed in a way where it's supposed to be timeless. But it's not just the miracles, it's also the rulings. Okay? And the restrictions of Islam that have to apply and work for every society until the Day of Judgment. Again, this is why you see in certain matters Islam is very open. In other matters Islam is extremely strict. The matters that are strict are universal moral matters. Universal moral matters such as what? murder, treason, what else? Alcoholism, what's it called? Stealing. These have punishments that are listed out in the Sharia, because these things don't change as from society to society. But in regard to the punishment for stealing, it got withheld during a time of famine, when you know that people aren't stealing out of greed, that they're stealing out of need. And the punishment for stealing is when you steal out of greed. So you see how it's adaptable? But in social matters, these are not universal moral matters. They greatly differ from society to society and carry no innate harm or benefit. Right? Let's say, so Islam tends to be open enough to accommodate different times and cultures. In such matters, boundaries are placed to keep away from harm and abuse. For example, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, before Islam, men could marry as many women as they wanted. So that actually led to harm and abuse. And commonly, because it is very difficult or impossible for a man to meet the right of, 5, 6 wives. It's really like, it doesn't matter, who you are. It's just as far as a function of time splitting even. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not possible. So in such matters, Islam placed boundaries that are placed to keep away harm and abuse while laying the foundation for a functioning society. In business matters, for example, there is a free market with certain rules to prevent the rich from taking advantage of the poor. These include the prohibition of interest and restrictions on things like pawning, where it is only permissible for the one who sells a pawned item to take what he was owed. So if somebody gave you something as a pawn in regard, and it's worth $1,000, and he's only taking $300 from you, and then you sell it for $500, you need to give him back the $200. So you can't be taking advantage of somebody in that regard. In terms of marriage, we see a similar trend. Islam leaves room for cultural traditions. Right? Some people, they like to do like a henna day. Some people, they like to do this. Some people have like the bride, come down the stairs with like certain, song playing. Some people, they want to, do. Islam is open to a lot of cultural traditions. Right? An Afghan wedding will look very different from an Arab wedding, and there are different traditions involved. However, Islam sets the minimum restrictions to ensure the rights of both parties are protected. It is a contract with witnesses and safeguards to ensure those rights. It keeps the man from being taken advantage of and makes sure the woman will be taken care of in case of divorce or in case she has a child, etc. Does that make sense? So in regard to polygamy, how does this work? You already mentioned. Can anybody else share how this would impact something like polygamy? Is polygamy related to a universal moral matter like adultery or stealing or whatever? Is it something that may be more practical in certain societies than others? Yeah, it's a social matter. So what Islam does is it set the boundary at 4, because more than that would make it impossible for a person to actually fulfill the rights of these women. But then, according to the Hanbali opinion, right, they said that look, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is, marry 2, 3, or 4. And if you can't, then marry 1. But Allah says, you will not be able to be just to women, even if you try. So then they said that the preferred is 1, because then you're going to fall into being unjust. This is a valid opinion. Also, if for somebody to say that, look, it's better for somebody to have more than 1 because they're taking care of more people, etc., etc., etc. And if it's in a society where that's acceptable and the women are okay with it, and there's nothing in the contracts to prevent that and so on, then it is something that is good, in fact, because this person, just as subhanAllah the Prophet ﷺ did, he married a lot of women too in order to take care of them, in order to make alliances, etc., etc. Does that make sense? A little bit. Emotionally, it's a tough thing to swallow for a lot of people. Especially, it's hard to grasp for a lot of women because of a lack of understanding of some basic things in regard to men and male psychology. Women, again, are psychologically, or they say evolutionarily, tend to seek, the one partner and the best partner possible because they can only get pregnant once at a time, and therefore they bond to whoever that they're with, and so on. So in reality, if you study like how oxytocin works in the brain and whatever, when women become attached to a person, that becomes a reason for them to, be to dissociate from other people, or not to be able to have a bond with other guys. But for men, psychologically, that's not the case. Evolutionarily, it's also not the case. People who try to justify it from an evolutionary perspective, they don't try to justify polygamy. They try to justify, a'udhu billah, why men are the way that they are. They say that, look, men biologically, or evolutionarily, practically, can, in order to ensure that their species survives, are biologically wired and psychologically wired to be with as many people as possible. That's, the evolutionary explanation. As far as the Islamic explanation, from Allah knowing the nature of human beings, knowing the nature of men, knowing the nature of women, has made it possible for women to marry only one at a time. It causes a lot of problems, health issues, psychological issues. That's something that would be damaging if women married more than one. It causes a lot of imbalances, problems, etc. in regard to kids, in regard to lifestyle. How do you even make that work, etc. Now, there's one more important factor, which is that one thing important for women to know, that if actually in a society where that's something that's acceptable, and here it's such a very strong social construct that that a woman feels diminished in her own value because she's viewing the man as if he does that he values her less. Is that true or not? Yeah, because naturally, because the way that women are, if a woman married a guy and she was interested in somebody else, that would mean that she's not being emotionally or physically, feels that her husband is enough. But for a man, and you saw, what Tiger Woods did, and I don't justify what he did at all, and it's haram and it's a major sin, that it has a very heavy punishment in Islam. But he's married to a model, and then he's going and, cheating on her with whatever, it doesn't matter. People that he doesn't even care about, but it's him caring about his wife or not caring about his wife. It doesn't affect how he feels about other people. But I'm not saying that it's a blanket statement and that's it. Men, when they care for their wife, then in Islam they should not even look at somebody else outside of their marriage. And if you're in a society where you're going to marry one and it's in your marriage contract to marry one, then khalas, stop. What are you doing? But it doesn't degrade the position of a woman, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed that to happen. It just men and women think differently and feel differently. Does that make sense? I know this is a very controversial topic. This I learned in psychology classes here at UC Davis. Yes. No, it's not a violation of again, so let me answer the question in a very brief way. Somebody comes and says, "Oh, hey, why are men allowed to marry 4 wives in Islam?" I'm like, look, this is something that, Islam is supposed to be a religion that works for all societies. So therefore, this is a matter that people can deal with differently in different societies. Islam set the minimum limit because the maximum limit, because if people do more than that, then it's actually going to be harmful and impossible and so on, and it cannot be managed. But again, if Islam set the restriction to 1 wife, then that would also be unmanageable for other societies. Now, yes, in the past, it was needed. And it was necessary, and of course men do have the capability of doing that if they have the financial capability. Yeah, they have the physical capability, they are wired. Google the Coolidge effect. That's a very interesting psychological phenomenon, which is not probably appropriate to talk about in the masjid. But now, in terms of our society, we can deal with it in a different way. If the norm is very strong that people marry only 1, and a woman wants that in her marriage contract, no problem. Even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the women from the Ansar, it was more of in their culture that they would be very jealous. So the Prophet ﷺ did not marry from from the Ansar. So it differs from society to society, and if people do have that as in their marriage contract, in the society, yeah, it's not something that people are forced to do. Hey, you must marry more than 1, or you have to be okay with your husband marrying more than 1. If it's something that's a non-negotiable for you, put it in your marriage contract, and then it's set. And of course, if your husband wants to marry somebody else, then in that case, they'd have to divorce. You can, or if you say that in the case I don't have kids, you can marry somebody, you can deal with it however you want to deal with it. And sometimes if you say that some things in a marriage contract wouldn't be allowed to put in there, but that's a deeper matter of fiqh. Does that make sense? Anybody else? Any contradiction, objection? So Islam restricted that which was previously unrestricted. In Judeo-Christian tradition, a man could only generally meet I have the full answer. Psychological, physiological reasoning. I added another paragraph that, if this comes up, I said it is also hypocritical for people in the West to view countries that had polygamy as immoral or promiscuous. The average American has just over 7 sexual partners in their lifetime. Right? In Saudi Arabia, the number is between 1 and 2. In a country that allows marrying 4 wives, the average partners that a person has during their life is between 1 and 2. So in America, the average is 7. And that's low compared to like some European countries. The 7 partners in America usually are not married and have little obligation to one another. In contrast to Islamic regulations, in Islam, before a man has intercourse with a woman, the safeguard of a nikah ensures that her emotional needs will be protected and she can't be abandoned. He has already proven his financial capability and seriousness by paying her dowry, and her chastity and the dignity of potential children is intact, and their care is guaranteed. That makes much more sense. As such, women are respected and not treated like objects and discarded. Now, even when people practice polygamy, is it 50% of Muslims who practice polygamy? Not even. Not even close. Even back in the day. Now, in America, the norm of infidelity in marriage is 50%. So they aren't, monogamous in America anyways. Before marriage, after marriage, 50% of people report cheating. A'udhu billah. Anything else? Okay. New topic. Was Islam spread by the sword? Okay. Anybody can answer this one?
Wasn't it mostly influenced through traders and things like that?
Yes, in many ways, yes.
That's contrary to the Christians. We cannot forcibly convert people, although there is a tax for people living under a Muslim society who aren't Muslim, there's no such thing as forced conversion. For the example of Spain, Al-Andalus, a lot of the Muslims were forcibly converted by Christians. When there were Christians there before and the Muslims came, it was spread through argument, shahada, it was spread through the oneness of Allah. It was not
Logical debate.
Yeah.
Very good. So I really like what you said because you packed a lot of meaning in a few sentences. You said that as opposed to Christianity, Islam is not allowed. It does not allow forced conversions. What was the next thing you said?
In the case of Spain.
No, before that you said something else that was good.
I don't know.
Ah, man. You can go back and get it from the recording. So now distinguish between two things. The topic of were Islamic lands spread by conquest and why/why not. That's a different topic. Okay? Is a separate discussion and question. Suffice to say that war was the third and least desired outcome when entering a new land. The Prophet ﷺ even said, do not long to meet the enemy in battle. لا تتمنوا لقاء العدو ولكن إذا لقيتم فاصبروا واسألوا الله الثبات أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Do not hope, desire, I want to fight, I want violence. No, but rather if you see the enemy, then be patient and ask Allah to be firm. So Islam could not even possibly have been spread by force because the entrance of Islam by someone who is being forced is actually invalid. Cases of forced conversion are virtually unheard of during Islamic expansion. Now, some practical proof. In Egypt, are there Christians that still exist in Egypt?
Yes.
They weren't forced to convert.
Are there Jewish people that still exist in Morocco?
Jewish people still in Morocco. Now, so clearly people weren't forced to convert. Now, but when did Islam become the majority in Egypt? When did Islam become the majority when Muslims entered that land? Now you're saying, okay, Muslims can enter that land, the people can pay tax. Oh yeah, that was the other thing that you mentioned. Yes, there is a tax paid by non-Muslims living within Muslim lands. Yes, if Muslims took over an area and there's non-Muslims living there, they're not forced, they pay a tax. If they didn't want to pay the tax, then they had the opportunity to, take it to the battlefield. So, practical proof that people were not forced to Islam through force and conquest is that in conquered lands, it sometimes took 600 years for Islam to become the majority religion in that country. Imagine, 600 years for Islam to be more than 50% in a country that is, under the Muslim government. There's no compulsion religion. Indonesia came to Islam through trade, and so on. A lot of people, the country converted to Islam, it wasn't even taken over. They willingly, mashallah, and it's the biggest Muslim country, highest population Muslim country in the world, yes. The Berbers?
Yeah, the Berbers, the reason why they're so, some of them are very hostile towards Muslims is because they believe that Islam came by force and that the Muslims came and killed their people and kind of wiped out.
A lot of Berbers became Muslim. A lot of Berbers did not become Muslim. Berbers have their own language also, which is different than Arabic, so there's a cultural clash. They don't like people viewing them as, oh, you're Arabs. No, we're Berbers. We were in the desert first. We were there, before the Arabic language came to North Africa, they were Berbers. So they have a lot of that pride in their ancestry and in their, history. And as far as the specifics and what happened to them, Allahu A'lam. But yes, Muslims could have done things that were immoral or wrong. But what Islam actually prohibits is forcing somebody to enter into Islam. And yes, a lot of that area was, taken over in conquest. And then some people, instead of, choosing to pay the tax, they said, oh, okay, we're Muslim. And they still had to pay zakah. Yes?
Are there's the case of like the Byzantine Empire when the Turkish Ottoman government, when it was like first beginning, would sit with the Christians. They would literally recite the Bible and the Quran like on top of like I don't know how else to translate it, but like a membar, you know, like a. And then people would convert because of that. But they actually worked with the government. I mean, they slowly took over the Christian empire through that. But like, they never said you had to have converted. They never spread it by the sword. They actually influenced governments together until the Muslims had the upper hand and we took over the government.
Interesting. Anything else? Okay. Question 4, why is apostasy punishable by death? So apostasy is like a form of treason in Islam. What a person keeps to themselves cannot be punished. If somebody doesn't believe in Islam in themselves. However, it is believed that Islam is a way to success, is the only way to success, and heaven and so on, and being saved. And other than Islam is a sure way to failure and a fate far worse than death. So if a person spreads their apostasy, that they're trying to make others non-Muslim, and they're saying, hey, look, I'm a non-Muslim, and forget Islam, and arguing against Islam and whatever in a Muslim society, and is publicizing this, then what they are doing is calling others to be in hellfire forever. They're doing worse than killing people. So if you're a non-Muslim in a Muslim society, if you apostate, if you leave Islam in a Muslim society, then you keep it to yourself. Nobody can do anything to you. You go and you publicize it and you start dragging people into hellfire, then you're doing something which we believe in Islam, that is worse than killing somebody. So that person then is doing a major crime. So if you want to go and spread your non-Muslim beliefs or whatever, leave the Islamic country and then spread them in order to avoid the punishment. Obviously, a lot of people, this doesn't sit well with them because of the idea of freedom of speech. But then again, freedom of speech to a certain extent in Islam exists in other extents. For the sake of people's benefit, it is restricted.
Even in America, for the sake of people's benefit, the freedom of speech is restricted.
And even in America, if you commit treason, you can be
Arrested. But even if you yell, for example, fire in a movie theater, there's a very famous court case where you can't do that because it causes a danger, people can get trampled, things like that. Like if there's no fire.
Yeah, in America, if you spread hate speech, if you talk bad about Zionists, no, really, anti-Semitism is illegal. So you can talk bad about Muslims, you can call the Prophet ﷺ whatever you want to call him, and that's perfectly legal, and you're protected under free speech. But if you start, saying, whatever conspiracy theories like these people own the world and blah, 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 and all of this, and, and start talking smack about that, then you actually could be arrested. Anything related to this? Number 5, why is swine prohibited in Islam?
Say out what order it is.
Thank you. Yes.
Just for multiple health reasons, swine are not sanitary in their living spaces, and oftentimes the meat of the pig is the most unhealthiest of all meat.
Good. It doesn't sweat out toxins, etc., etc., etc. It causes gout, all of these types of things. Yes.
Okay, so
Briefly.
what?
We have 7 more minutes.
Okay, I'll say.
And then I actually have to go. We don't have time for questions.
I'll say it's very brief. Swine.
Any questions that you have regarding these things, we can talk about them next week, inshallah.
Okay, so we don't eat animals that are predators, animals that eat the flesh of other animals. Pigs oftentimes will eat pigs that are alive, and they eat whatever, even if it's alive, they have no filter within like their mind. So even in that category, you can put a pig in the category of a potential predator, and those are things we do not eat.
Very good. Excellent. So all of these are very rational and good questions. The important thing is to say, it is forbidden because God has forbidden it. Whether we understand the reason for it or not, it is forbidden because God has forbidden it. However, the wisdom of that prohibition is not hard to glimpse. Know that pork is forbidden for Jews and originally also for Christians, right? It's parasite-ridden, gout-causing, heart attack-inducing, the unhealthiest, filthy meat, potential predator, all of these things. These are, to see the wisdom in God's commandment is simple. Maybe back then, you couldn't prove it as easily, right? Somebody's like, oh, this is a meat and that's a meat. I'll eat this too. It's like, look, God is saying don't do it. Now, the more science advances, the more we're able to understand the wisdom behind a lot of God's rulings, but still understand that we're limited in a lot of things. Number 6, why women wear hijab in Islam while men don't have to. Okay, God knows His creation and has ultimate wisdom in His orders. However, it doesn't take ultimate wisdom to determine the answer to this question. Right? Psychologically, men are more easily attracted physically than women. Women's exposed hair and chest have a far more powerful psychological effect on men than the other way around. Men are also more often the pursuers and even aggressors, a'udhu billah. In order to maintain dignity and protection, God has mandated these laws. Women easily psychologically recognize men as human despite their hair showing. All right. However, men exposed to pictures of women who are immodestly dressed fail to show activity in human recognition centers of the brain. Now, if the woman was sexualized, the man's human recognition part of their brain did not go off. Similarly, like the same way if they were viewing a piece of meat, more base parts of the brain became activated. Now, if you want to have a society, right? If a righteous man were even to see a naked woman, he is commanded to show the same respect to her and lower his gaze as he would want for someone else to do to his mother or sister. However, Islam doesn't assume that all men are righteous. Right? Islam takes into account the natural physiological human reactions and places social conduct and dress guidelines to benefit society. It is both common sense and scientific fact that when women are dressed more modestly, they are treated with more respect and more in accordance with how they conduct themselves than how they appear. Encouraging or necessitating women in a society to beautify themselves for strangers leads women to solely being judged by their appearance and not on their merit. Women who don't wear makeup are treated worse, and even asked if they're tired or sick today. Who here has experienced that a little bit? That if they didn't wear makeup, that people are like, oh, is something wrong? Or like, why? What's wrong with you today? Or whatever. Yeah, it's something that commonly, occurs. That's not, in Islam, you treat somebody with respect and so on, regardless of their appearance, and it's not like a fashion show in public. You're not out there to impress people by the way that you look like. You should be treated in accordance with your character and so on. Unless your look is relevant, like in the case of marriage and so on, then you see somebody. It's important also to see somebody in that case without makeup before you get married to them. Any questions, additions, things I may have missed? There's why do Muslims consume non-vegetarian food? That's not too common, some people say using idols as a focal point for concentration and prayer and using the Kaaba as a focal point is the same thing. Right? The Kaaba is not a focal point for concentration. Right? Nor is it an object of worship or prayer. Rather, it is a marker that unifies the direction of prayer for Muslims around the world. We have one God, one creator, one purpose, one religion, 2 Eids. And we should be unified in our hearts and minds. Life itself exists by the spinning of protons and electrons around a nucleus. The nucleus is not a source of worship for the protons and neutrons. Rather, it is a hub that God has placed to draw in and center the atoms that are needed for life to exist. Similarly, this divine pattern continues if you look at the Kaaba, with pilgrims from every corner of the world circumambulating the Kaaba in the same direction and manner. Okay, number 9, Quran was inspired by Satan. Number 10, Muhammad ﷺ copied the Quran from the Bible.
The Bible copies itself.
Okay, these are different questions that we can address, inshallah. If any of them are very relevant, we'll address them in class. Otherwise, I'll share the answers that I have written, and the people here can add whatever they want. And then the topic of evolution, inshallah, we'll discuss alongside the Gorap method, the topic of the Big Bang, and what is Islam in the first place, why we should follow the Prophet ﷺ. These are some very important questions. But for us to discuss these things, can everybody do me a favor, please? Can you write down Gorap on your phones? For God's sake, please. The videos are a total of 1 hour and 50 minutes, and there's like 6 different videos. And they're about 20 minutes. Abdurrahim Green, discussing. No, just Gorap. Gorap. The first result on YouTube is a 6-video playlist. Can anybody look it up? Verify, please. Got it? It's there? Please check it out and come and discuss next week. Next week, hopefully, if a non-Muslim is coming and sitting with us, that by the end of the class, they would be like, wow, Islam is the truth, God exists, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the Prophet of Allah. From a logical perspective, that's what I want. Okay? Everybody here should be able to talk about these things. You can take notes and share with us your notes. I really want more participation from everyone. Please. So that's your homework, again. The people who already saw it, if anybody already went and saw it, then please, you review it or bring notes or whatever. What's a way that we can communicate, that I can share with you some materials before next week or even after? Should we get an email list, get everybody's emails or something?
You can do that, or I can just forward it on our mass chat.
On the mass chat?
On our Dawah committee chat.
Okay, is everybody here in the Dawah committee chat?
I can just add you to it as well.
Okay, add me to the Dawah committee chat. If somebody's not on it, then inshallah get on it with Brother Umar, inshallah. And then we'll be in touch. I have to head out this second. Anything urgent, burning? Did anybody benefit from today? Did we discuss some? Inshallah. You should be satisfied yourself with these things. That's very important, with these questions. Not everybody is going to be satisfied, but in the end, it's a perfectly logical and rational answer. And if you believe in Islam, if you believe in Allah, then these things just are very easy to understand and fall into place. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik.